A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. Arthur Schopenhauer. This brutal statement unveils the core of emotional dependence, the illusion of control. We believe we freely choose whom to love, yet beneath the surface, unseen, forces pull the strings. Childhood wounds, unmet needs, and a desperate thirst for validation. Emotional dependence is not love. It's a silent pact with suffering, disguised as devotion. Schopenhauer dissected this phenomenon with ruthless clarity. To him, attachment was a cunning trap of the will, not a noble pursuit, but a cycle of longing that enslaves the mind. Today, this dynamic is more alive than ever. Men fall into toxic patterns, mistaking emotional dependence for connection, only to find themselves powerless, drained and discarded. In this video, we'll uncover why emotional dependence cripples masculine strength, how it manifests in modern relationships, and most importantly, how to break free from this invisible prison. This isn't about blaming others. It's about reclaiming yourself. If you're tired of repeating the same painful patterns, hit subscribe, leave a like, and stay until the end. This might be the most uncomfortable truth you'll face, but it's the first step to real freedom. Schopenhauer believed that human desire is inherently insatiable, a perpetual hunger that no object or person can truly satisfy. Emotional dependence, in this view, is not a flaw exclusive to relationships. It is a direct extension of this endless striving of the will. When a man fixates on a woman for emotional fulfillment, he unknowingly assigns her the role of completing his fragmented self. This projection is not about her, it is about the void he refuses to confront within. Every gesture of affection, every moment of validation becomes a fleeting patch over deeper insecurities. The tragedy lies in mistaking this temporary relief for love. True connection becomes impossible because the man is not relating to her, reality, but to his own unhealed needs. Schopenhauer warned that as long as man chases satisfaction in external objects, including romantic partners, he will remain enslaved to disappointment. Emotional dependence operates subtly. It masquerades as romantic devotion, as loyalty, as being a good man who loves selflessly. But beneath this noble facade lurks a desperate craving to be chosen, to be enough, to finally silence the inner critic. This dynamic is seductive because it feeds on a core wound, the belief that one's worth is validated externally. Modern relationships amplify this pattern. Social media glorifies couple goals, constant attention, and performative affection. Men, bombarded by these images, unconsciously adopt emotional dependence as the standard of love. They measure their value by responses, messages, and presence. When ignored, anxiety spikes. When noticed, temporary relief follows. This cycle mirrors addiction, not to substances, but to fleeting emotional highs. Schopenhauer's diagnosis becomes even more piercing when we understand that emotional dependence robs men of agency. A dependent man reacts, adjusts, and molds himself to maintain connection at all costs. His desires, boundaries, and even self-respect become negotiable. He fears rocking the boat, setting limits, or asserting needs because deep down, he believes, these actions might result in abandonment. This fear is not about losing a specific woman. It's about confronting the internal emptiness her presence temporarily masks. In this dynamic, the woman holds perceived power, not because she seeks to dominate, but because he has surrendered control of his emotional equilibrium to her. The paradox is cruel. The more a man depends emotionally, the less attractive he becomes. Genuine connection thrives on mutual respect and inner wholeness. Emotional dependence, however, reeks of scarcity. It signals to the woman that the man lacks emotional self-sufficiency, making him less of a partner and more of a burden. Ironically, what begins as an attempt to secure love ends up pushing it away. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that desire inherently repels satisfaction. By clinging, one chases away the very thing one seeks. Emotional dependence is thus self-defeating by design. Breaking free from emotional dependence requires a ruthless self-inquiry. It demands confronting uncomfortable questions. Why do I seek validation from her? What am I trying to fix within myself through this relationship? Schopenhauer would argue that liberation comes not from attaining the object of desire, but from transcending the illusion that this object holds the key to fulfillment. This detachment is not cold indifference, it is clarity. It allows a man to love freely, without the chains of neediness, because his sense of self is no longer outsourced. Most men fear this process because it involves emotional solitude. It feels safer to cling to dependency than to face the raw discomfort of standing alone with one's unmet needs. But it is precisely in this solitude that a man reconnects with his core. Schopenhauer did not promise a blissful outcome. He acknowledged life's inherent suffering. However, by ceasing to project salvation onto others, a man reclaims his power. Emotional independence does not mean isolation. It means meeting the world, including romantic relationships, from a place of inner completeness. Only then does love transform from a desperate need into a genuine choice. Emotional dependence rarely originates in adulthood. It is often rooted in early life experiences, where emotional needs were unmet, inconsistently met, or met conditionally. For many men, childhood becomes the silent architect of their relational patterns. A boy who only received affection when he performed, achieved, or pleased others internalizes the belief that love must be earned, never freely given. Schopenhauer's concept of the will to life reflects this unconscious drive, a blind, relentless force pushing individuals to seek what was once denied. Thus, when this boy becomes a man, he seeks in romantic relationships the approval and acceptance that once eluded him. Emotional dependence, then, is not simply a weakness, it is a maladaptive survival strategy born from emotional neglect. The modern world exacerbates these wounds. Contemporary culture bombards men with narratives that equate success with being desired. Movies, music, and social media glorify the man who gets the girl as a symbol of validation. This constant reinforcement conditions men to see romantic attention as the ultimate proof of worth. Schopenhauer would argue that this collective illusion traps men in a cycle of endless striving, where desire becomes the master and satisfaction remains forever out of reach. Emotional dependence thus thrives not only on personal wounds, but also on cultural indoctrination. An often overlooked aspect of emotional dependence is the role of ego. At first glance, dependence seems like a humble, submissive state. But beneath it lies a subtle form of egoism, the belief that one's worth should be recognized, validated, and affirmed by another. It is an inverted form of pride, where, instead of boasting overtly, the man demands silent confirmation of his value through constant attention. Schopenhauer's philosophy exposes this self-centered aspect of attachment. Desire is inherently ego-driven, seeking to impose one's will upon the external world to alleviate internal discomfort. Another hidden root is the fear of insignificance. For the emotionally dependent man, being alone is not merely a logistical inconvenience. It feels like an existential threat. Solitude confronts him with his perceived smallness, his lack of inherent worth. Relationships become a shield against this confrontation. Schopenhauer's perspective on suffering offers a harsh but liberating truth. Life is suffering, but much of it stems from illusions of control and significance. By accepting one's smallness without seeking constant external validation, a man begins to erode the foundations of his dependence. Furthermore, emotional dependence feeds on fantasies. The dependent man constructs an idealized image of the woman, projecting onto her qualities she may not possess. This idealization creates a feedback loop. The more he depends, the more he distorts reality to justify his dependence. Schopenhauer warned against such illusions, emphasizing that desire distorts perception. The object of desire becomes a canvas for the individual's unmet needs, not a person seen in her true form. This distortion prevents genuine connection, trapping the man in a relationship with his own projections rather than with the real person. The cost of emotional dependence extends beyond romantic relationships. It spills into friendships, work dynamics, and self-perception. A man who relies on external validation in love often mirrors this neediness in other areas, seeking approval from bosses, peers, or even strangers. His identity becomes fragmented, built on a shaky foundation of others' opinions. Schopenhauer's solution was radical detachment, not apathy, but freedom from the compulsion to be validated. By anchoring one's sense of self internally, the man becomes less reactive, less desperate, and paradoxically more attractive to others. Breaking this cycle requires a painful but necessary shift, embracing emotional discomfort as a teacher rather than an enemy. Every pang of loneliness, every moment of insecurity, becomes an opportunity for self-inquiry. Schopenhauer viewed suffering as an inevitable part of existence, but also as a catalyst for philosophical awakening. Emotional dependence, when confronted with honesty, can thus become a doorway to deeper self-awareness. It is in this space of discomfort that true emotional strength is forged. One of the most destructive consequences of emotional dependence is the gradual erosion of masculine power. This power is not about domination or external control. It is the inner stability that allows a man to act from clarity, not compulsion. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that the will, when unchecked, enslaves man to endless cycles of craving and disappointment. Emotional dependence places a man's emotional equilibrium in the hands of another, making him reactive, unstable, and easily manipulated, not through malice but through his own inner frailty. Every moment of neediness becomes a leak in his personal power. A dependent man loses the ability to say no. Boundaries, which are essential expressions of self-respect, become blurred. Fear of losing connection overrides the instinct to protect one's integrity. He tolerates disrespect, accepts crumbs of attention, and justifies poor treatment, all in the name of preserving the relationship. But in doing so, he communicates to himself and others that his value is negotiable. Schopenhauer would argue that such a man becomes a slave to his own desires, living not as a free agent, but as a puppet of his emotional compulsions. This loss of power is subtle but pervasive. It infiltrates decision-making, self-perception, and even body language. A man entangled in emotional dependence hesitates to take risks, voice opinions, or assert his needs. He becomes hyper-vigilant to his partner's moods, constantly adjusting himself to avoid conflict. This reactive posture is the antithesis of masculine presence. Schopenhauer's emphasis on detachment reveals that true strength arises from inner sovereignty, not from external approval. The dependent man forfeits this sovereignty in exchange for fleeting moments of validation. Ironically, the very behavior intended to preserve the relationship often accelerates its demise. Emotional dependence breeds resentment, not attraction. Women, whether consciously or subconsciously, sense the imbalance. What initially appears as affection quickly morphs into emotional burden. The dependent man's neediness creates an invisible pressure, suffocating the organic flow of connection. Schopenhauer's view of desire as inherently self-defeating becomes painfully evident here. The more one clings, the more the desired object slips away. Furthermore, emotional dependence distorts a man's perception of love. Genuine love is an offering, an extension of one's completeness. Dependence, however, seeks to extract, to fill an inner void. This extraction mindset turns relationships into transactions. If I give enough, she will complete me. Schopenhauer would argue that such dynamics are doomed, as they rest on illusions of fulfillment through others. Until a man addresses his own inner emptiness, no relationship can offer lasting peace. To reclaim his power, a man must shift from seeking to offering, from extraction to expression. This does not imply emotional coldness, but requires emotional self-sufficiency. When a man no longer needs a partner to validate his worth, his presence becomes magnetic, not needy. Schopenhauer's philosophy does not dismiss love, it redefines its foundation. By detaching from compulsive desire, a man opens space for authentic connection, one not built on dependency, but on mutual respect and freedom. Ultimately, emotional dependence reveals a deeper existential question: who holds the key to my peace? Schopenhauer's answer is clear: no one but yourself. As long as a man outsources his emotional stability, he remains vulnerable to the whims of others. True masculine power is reclaimed not by controlling others, but by mastering one's inner world. Emotional independence is not the absence of connection, it is the presence of inner wholeness which transforms how one relates to the external world. Breaking free from emotional dependence is not an act of rebellion against women or relationships, it is a return to oneself. Schopenhauer taught that freedom comes not from the attainment of desires, but from transcending their grip. For the emotionally dependent man, this means confronting the uncomfortable reality that no external person will ever resolve his internal struggles. The first step toward liberation is acknowledging the illusion. Love does not heal unaddressed wounds, it only amplifies them. Until a man meets his own emotional needs, every relationship will repeat the same painful script. The path to emotional independence begins with solitude. This is not the loneliness that the dependent man fears, but a chosen solitude that allows space for self-reflection. Schopenhauer often emphasized the value of retreating from the noise of the world to engage in philosophical contemplation. In practical terms, this means stepping back from compulsive seeking and observing one's patterns with brutal honesty. How do I react when I feel ignored? Why does her attention define my mood? Such questions dismantle the automatic behaviors that sustain dependence. Detaching from emotional dependence also involves redefining self-worth. For too long, the dependent man measures his value through the eyes of others, particularly romantic partners. Schopenhauer's perspective challenges this externalization by asserting that value is intrinsic, not assigned. A man's worth is not contingent on being desired, needed, or chosen. Internalizing this truth requires consistent effort, through journaling, meditation, and confronting limiting beliefs ingrained since childhood. This inner work is not glamorous, but it is essential for genuine liberation. Another crucial aspect is reclaiming personal boundaries. Emotional dependence erodes a man's ability to say no, to assert his needs without fear of losing connection. Rebuilding this capacity involves small, consistent acts of self-respect, setting limits, expressing honest opinions, and prioritizing personal growth over appeasement signal to oneself and others that emotional equilibrium is non-negotiable. Schopenhauer viewed detachment not as indifference, but as clarity. Boundaries are a manifestation of this clarity, recognizing what belongs to you and what does not. Emotional independence also flourishes through purpose. When a man's life revolves solely around a romantic relationship, dependence is inevitable. Schopenhauer warned against the narrow focus of desire, advocating for a broader engagement with art, philosophy, and self-cultivation. By immersing oneself in meaningful pursuits, a man diversifies his sources of fulfillment. His emotional landscape becomes richer, less vulnerable to the fluctuations of a single relationship. Purpose anchors him in his own reality, diminishing the gravitational pull of dependence. An often overlooked strategy is cultivating male friendships and mentors. Emotional dependence thrives in isolation, where a man lacks alternative sources of support and reflection. Building connections with other men who embody emotional resilience provides a mirror for growth. Schopenhauer valued the exchange of ideas among thinkers, recognizing that community enriches individual insight. In the same way, male camaraderie offers a grounding force, reminding the dependent man that he is not alone in his struggles. Finally, breaking free demands patience. Emotional dependence is a deeply ingrained pattern, not a switch to be flipped. Schopenhauer's acceptance of life's inherent suffering teaches that transformation is a gradual, often uncomfortable process. Each moment of self-awareness, each small act of independence weakens the chains of dependence. Over time, these incremental shifts solidify into a new way of being, where love is no longer a desperate need, but a conscious, free choice. Emotional independence is not the rejection of relationships, but the elevation of their quality. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that the constant pursuit of desire traps individuals in suffering, yet detachment liberates them to experience life authentically. For the emotionally dependent man, the shift from need to choice marks a profound transformation. When validation is no longer a necessity, connection becomes purer, rooted in mutual respect rather than unconscious craving. The man who no longer needs is the man who truly loves, because his affection flows from abundance, not scarcity. One of the greatest misconceptions about emotional independence is the fear of becoming cold or indifferent. Schopenhauer's detachment is often misinterpreted as emotional apathy, but in truth, it allows for deeper, more honest engagement. A man who is emotionally self-sufficient can afford to be present, to listen, and to give without hidden agendas. His interactions are free of the subtle manipulations driven by insecurity. This clarity makes him not only a better partner, but also a more grounded human being. The benefits of emotional independence ripple across all areas of life. In career, friendships and family dynamics, the man who no longer seeks constant approval navigates challenges with greater composure. Schopenhauer's emphasis on inner sovereignty translates into practical resilience. Criticism no longer destabilizes him. Rejection, once a devastating blow, becomes a redirection rather than a personal failure. He approaches life with a calm detachment that enhances his decision-making and emotional health. Perhaps the most liberating aspect is the end of the pursuit for completion through others. Emotional dependence hinges on the fantasy that someone else will heal what is broken within. Schopenhauer dismantled this illusion, asserting that the will's desires are insatiable and that peace comes from transcending them, not indulging them. The emotionally independent man recognizes that his wholeness is his responsibility. Relationships become a space of shared growth, not mutual extraction. As a result, his relationships improve. Paradoxically, the less he needs validation, the more he receives genuine connection. His partners sense his emotional solidity, which fosters respect and attraction. The dynamic shifts from clinginess to freedom, from control to curiosity. Schopenhauer's warning against the delusions of desire transforms into a guide for authentic relating, where presence replaces possession and love is given space to breathe. This evolution demands continuous self-awareness, emotional independence. Fear's not a destination, but a practice. Moments of regression, where old patterns of neediness resurface, are inevitable. However, each trigger becomes an opportunity for reflection rather than self-condemnation. Schopenhauer's acceptance of suffering as inherent to life provides a realistic framework. Discomfort is not failure, but part of the human condition. The key is to observe, understand, and choose differently. In the end, emotional independence is about reclaiming authorship over one's life. The man who no longer entrusts his peace to external circumstances becomes unshakable. He engages with love, ambition, and community from a place of inner fullness. Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a sobering yet empowering truth. True freedom arises not from getting what we want, but from no longer being enslaved by the wanting. This is the essence of masculine emotional mastery. In the end, the journey from emotional dependence to true emotional independence is not a conquest over women, relationships, or even the external world, but a profound victory within oneself, a reclamation of agency, dignity, and authentic masculinity that Schopenhauer so relentlessly advocated for. His philosophy, often misunderstood as pessimistic, offers men a brutally honest yet liberating perspective. Suffering is inevitable, but much of it is self-inflicted through the illusions of desire and the futile attempts to extract fulfillment from others. Emotional dependence is one of the most insidious of these illusions, masquerading as love, devotion, and connection, while quietly eroding a man's self-respect, clarity, and power. The man trapped in this cycle becomes a ghost in his own life, reacting instead of acting, seeking approval instead of embodying worth, and projecting fantasies onto women instead of engaging with their authentic selves. The paradox Schopenhauer unveils is cruel but essential. The more we chase validation through emotional dependence, the more elusive genuine connection becomes, for it is impossible to be truly loved while one is enslaved by the need to be loved. Freedom emerges not by rejecting relationships, but by transcending the compulsive need to derive one's identity from them. The emotionally independent man is not detached in the sense of coldness. Rather, he is anchored, capable of giving and receiving love without the chains of neediness, without the constant internal negotiation of, am I enough? His value is no longer rented out for external approval. It is owned, lived, and expressed from within. This internal shift radiates outward, transforming how he navigates relationships, challenges, and even solitude. He becomes a man who chooses, not one who clings, a man whose presence commands respect not through force but through quiet, unwavering self-possession. In a world that constantly encourages men to seek completion through others, Schopenhauer's hard-hitting Inconvenient diagnosis serves as a radical call to return home to oneself. This path is neither easy nor glamorous. It demands brutal self-honesty, the courage to sit with discomfort, and the discipline to rebuild one's sense of self on unshakable foundations. But the reward is priceless: emotional sovereignty, inner peace, and the ability to love from fullness, not emptiness. You are not condemned to be a prisoner of your own desires. You are not fated to repeat the same toxic cycles. The key to breaking free has been in your hands all along, not in changing others, but in understanding and mastering yourself. Schopenhauer's wisdom does not promise a life without suffering, but it offers a path to suffering less foolishly, less reactively, and ultimately to suffering with dignity and purpose. Emotional independence is the gateway to that path. Now, the question is not whether others will give you the love you crave, but whether you are willing to give yourself the respect you deserve. If this message resonated with you, if you're ready to step out of the shadows of emotional dependence and reclaim your authentic strength, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might be trapped in the same cycle. Join a community of men committed to personal mastery and philosophical clarity. This is not just about relationships, it's about how you choose to live. Don't wait for others to validate your worth. Start the journey back to yourself today.